for everyone who was joining as we were talking, you didn't like come in. Well, you did come in halfway through a conversation, but like, I mean, that was the plan, I guess. Welcome. We're going to give people another minute or so. We still see people flowing in before we officially start. But we did actually hit the start meeting right in the middle of a conversation. But you guys were talking about Exchange. Like, I mean, Exchange on-prem. Like, to be fair, one of the news items here is which government group talking about like giving the report on how nation
on
state
Storm
actors,
05 through 38.
Right. Like was able to infiltrate into Exchange Online to get U.S. diplomat email. So it's like, I don't know, like there's no solution here, just problems.
Yep. Have you read that whole report, Brian?
I read chunks of it.
It's like 38 pages. It's pretty good. It's pretty in depth. I shared it in a couple of places internally. It's pretty interesting just from a like perspective, especially if you kind of like extrapolate out of it. There's still a lot of uncertainty around like what happened.
Yeah, they still don't seem to be as certain on how they got the cert.
Yeah,
but we're bearing the lead here.
Like they thought they knew, but they weren't sure.
Did I read 32 pages? I'm practically illiterate. You know this, so no, yeah. I didn't. But I did read.
Illiterate? Who have I been tweeting with?
Well, I literally said tomorrow when I meant Thursday. So I mean,
wait, I make fun of nobody about daytime mistakes. Like we have this thing called Fire Giant Standard Time, which is based on me because I don't do time zones.
Yeah,
and
I know.
One of the very, very important agreements I made in the very beginning and started Fire Giant with my co-founder, I was like, this is great. I have one requirement, and I could just see the blood draining out of his face. And I'm like, you have to book all travel. And he's like, what? I'm like, if I book it, I will end up getting there a day late or leave a day early, or it will be a terrible thing. Oh, yeah. You have to do this. He's like, I don't do daytime. So I make fun of nobody when they make time zone mistakes or daytime. I just don't. I'm notorious. It's bad.
All right.
I think we get to start. Yeah.
Let's get started. Let's get this train wreck officially on the road. Welcome to April's edition of the Patch Tuesday Support Group, a safe place to talk about patching vulnerabilities and all other fun IT-related things. My name is Brian Dam. I'll be one of your co-hosts. I'm joined by Jordan, who's going to talk to us as he usually does about security and vulnerabilities. Also with Jake, who's going to monitor the chat and interrupt us with your questions and insight. And also our special guest, Rob Mensching. Am I getting that right? Did I say that right?
Yep.
Mensching?
Mensching.
Oh, beautiful. Mensching. I was very worried about that. He is the benevolent dictator of the Wix toolset. Don't get that confused. And I'm sure this must annoy you, Rob, the Wix website thing.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry. It's the Wix toolset, which is...
I was first. I was first.
I'm the OG.
And Microsoft didn't want to trademark the name, so they could still get Wix.com. And they paid a lot of money for Wix.com.
Okay. It is an open source tool set for developing installers. So you can see where there's a beautiful synergy there with what Patch My PC does. But also, he also runs Fire Giant. He's the CEO and founder, which is I'm going to say a professional services company surrounding that same kind of exercise.
We do everything around the Wix tool set that needs to be done to make the Wix tool set a real product.
Right, there you
Tools, all those kind of things. Yep.
Right. So we're going to talk as usual. We will start with Jordan doing new vulnerabilities and interesting stuff for this month, and then I'll do a quick rundown of the news, and then we'll have a discussion with Rob. So with that, Jordan, go ahead and take it away.
All right, we're going to go ahead and start by jumping on into the wonderful world of Microsoft updates. And depending on which scorecard you want to play with, the total number of CVEs, unique CVEs that came out this month in the Microsoft Playground was anywhere from 145 all the way up to 151. It just depends on if you want to include some of what they called some third-party components to it. One of the initial release statements was that there was going to be 145 this month, but if you actually go out and pull the MSRC, you will end up with 151 different unique CVEs this month, which is a relatively high number. For a little bit out of scope, especially considering the number that were not critical. So it's kind of odd, the number of patches that we had this month based on the classification. So of the things that came out this month, there were 3 critical updates. Most of them were all pertaining to Windows IoT components, specifically around Defender for the critical updates this month. So if you are a shop that is running Windows IoT components, and if you are running Defender with Windows IoT on those components, such as a factory or anything like that, this may be the month for you to really dig down in and take a double look at what you're doing in your IoT things for your factory floor. There were 145 important updates this month that came out, 3 moderates and 1 low that came out. In the bucket of those CVEs, we had 7 denial of services, 31 that were elevation of privilege, 13 information disclosures, 67 remote code executions, 29 security bypasses, and 5 spoofing results. In terms of some specific KBs that you may want to pay attention to, the first one that we're going to touch on is KB 5025885. Again, that is KB 5025885. And this is specifically around the secure boot changes back from the ye old Black Lotus. There are potentially a number of reboots and potentially a number of large BitLocker, not Bitcoins. If entering Bitcoins is probably not what you want to put into your BitLocker field. There is the odd that you will need to enter a long BitLocker key several times over in order to actually get through the entirety of the reboot process for it. And the goalpost has been moved again a little bit in terms of when enforcement is going to happen. So make sure you do a quick read through on that. Get an idea of what the reboot pattern could look like, as well as for your organization, depending on what type of configurations you have. One other one that did come up that's kind of interesting, just because of the fact that, you know, everybody likes clicking on arbitrary links in email, is CVE 2024-29988. Again, that is CVE 2024-29988. This is specifically around smart screen prompt security. Effectively, there is a feature bypass vulnerability that came out here. This only got a rating of important. Kind of odd, since it's basically bypassing smart screen. The ability basically here is that there's a way that you can launch malicious files without the UI actively being shown if they can trick the user into getting them to run it. So if you stack some of the previous vulnerabilities that we've seen from the past month or so, like last month, where we had some things from Exchange and O365 where you could cause things to run behind the scenes. With something like this, you could easily see a chain where if you haven't patched in the last month or so, that those vulnerabilities could be stacked together into a pretty complicated attack chain. So definitely something to start thinking about, especially if you're a little bit behind on running your patches. In regards to third party,
what is smart screen again? What's smart screen again? I recognize the word, but no.
Yeah, smart screen is basically one of the filter controls for helping to prevent code. It's part of that thing that pops up when you have UAC as well. Like when you have UAC that pops up to you, or if you have unsigned files, like if you've ever tried to run something that normally should have a certificate and it doesn't have a certificate on it, it's not signed, that thing pops up and says, hey, we don't know what this is. Are you sure you want to run it? That's smart screen. So if you try and run an unsigned code,
yeah, that unsigned installer that I always created on the pipeline. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that right there.
Even signed installers that don't use EV that haven't been downloaded a lot have these problems. We got to kind of prime the pump to get them out there and trusted.
Yeah, which is really fun when you're developing a pipeline for building your installer. It's like I've never seen this file before. It's like, of course you haven't. I've never seen this file together. Yeah, it finally just worked after 2 days.
Yeah, there's an analogy to this in warming up a a new domain so you can send mail from it. It's the exact same analogy.
Yeah. In the news for third-party updates this month, and be a little patient here. We're going to run through this because we're going to do this in real time, because we had kind of a large number of third-party updates this last month from the wonderful world of Patch My PC. Last month, we released 2,396 unique updates out into the world. So a few here or there possibly that came along the way from that. I'm going to be gathering some of these components of these results in real time here, just because of how long it took to gather them. Of those updates, we had 1,856 moderate updates, 8 low, 365 important, and 111 critical. And I bet you a whole bunch of them were Firefox. Of that, in the annual round of browser, or the monthly round, I should say, of browser-based wars, for Firefox, we had 252 updates. Do keep in mind that does not account for the multiple languages that came out and that were released. But if you have multi-language Firefox in there, Those are separate things that you need to account for in your organization. Google Chrome, there were 12 updates that came out this past month. For Edge, we had 15 updates that came out this month. And for Opera, there were 10 major updates that came out this month. Nothing tremendously majorly interesting, I would say, in this month, but maybe the biggest one, and I'll grab the article here to share along the way. There is some stuff about Adobe that came out this past month in regards to some disabling of cloud uploads of files when you're opening and doing stuff with Adobe. There was some news and stuff, and I don't know if Brian, if you had this in your spot later on here, about around there's some registry key changes you can make to help mitigate Adobe trying to automatically upload or scan files and components like that that you may want to look at in your organization. I will find that here and post it in the chat while I hand it over to you.
Right. The only Adobe thing I found funny is Rod Trent was pointed at how Acrobat Reader kept trying to register itself as like the PDF viewer, and he was trying to do the opposite, which I found funny because I have real like visceral memories of everyone trying to do the reverse. I think it was Win 7 transitions when like how do we get everyone wanted to know how to write a script to get Acrobat Reader to register as as the default for PDFs. So it's kind of funny that we have apparently come full circle on that, and now everyone's like, and I remember people being like, I don't want to use Edge, it sucks, or which is like, I just remember those wars going on, and now it's probably like, no, forget it, we actually really don't need Adobe Reader anymore for the most part, which is how life goes. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to briefly go through some select news this month. The first one I'm going to mention here is there's a couple that are actually relevant to this month's updates. Actually, really the first month I feel like there's some stuff to talk about the actual updates that have been released, specifically KB 303, whatever this is, 5037570. This is really an OWC driver version 17 update, so it's applicable to all Windows devices, both workstation and servers. And for some reason, Fortinet and SonicWall are flagging the actual download itself as malicious. So that is causing some issues for actually getting that to download and patch, which is in my history, unless you guys can remember, I can't remember like a Microsoft patch actually getting flagged as like a virus. That's ludicrous to me, but that is what's going on. So if you are, you might pay some close attention to those updates. And again, they're not an operating system update; it's an OWC driver update. But you probably have those on most of your Win 10 and Windows 11 devices as well as your servers. The other one is last month's patches for server had a why didn't it pull up? Had an LSSAS memory leak. And that was basically, I mean, it was a memory leak. So depending on how much memory your domain controller had, it would slowly eat up memory until it consumed it all and then went ahead and died on you. So there was a out of band patch release for that. Let me see if I can get to this actual thing. Fine. There was an actual patch release for that out of band on the 22nd. But that's of course included in this month's cumulative update because that's what cumulative updates are and how they work. So if you had if you saw your domain controllers completely going off the rails, don't worry. Go ahead and install this month's patches, and in theory that should be fixed. I did hear, and there's reason for hope, I guess. I did hear feedback on the out of band patch that did actually solve the issue. So there is, reasons for hope. Jordan mentioned this already. So there's been this long, slow path towards mitigating what's called Black Lotus, and they've had this KB article out here, KB 5025885. They've had this out for over a year now, and there's this slow process of let's see, they have an actual timeline and we are officially here in this evaluation phase, which is really they're applying additional mitigations, but to apply these mitigations is kind of truly horrible. You have to set a registry value and then reboot the device twice. Then you have to set another registry value and then you have to reboot twice. And then you have to set another registry value and reboot twice.
What?
Yeah. For real. I mean, that, crap, I was here. That is literally what you would need to do to mitigate it. Now, again, I think most people are probably going to say, why is this not working? Why does I don't know how to use the internet apparently. Because I had it sitting here, but that is absolutely right now. Yeah, right there you go. If you walk through this, right, you set a key, you reboot twice, you set another key, you restart twice, and then somewhere down here you set another key and you restart twice. That is literally the Microsoft to be mitigated. Now, what's going to happen? Again, we're in the evaluation phase. This is them giving you an opportunity to go do these things to see if they're going to cause issues in your environment. Hopefully, because hope springs eternal, when they actually do the final rollout of this based on their timeline, it won't be this. Like, they're going to force these things upon you. But right now they're optional. But they're optional because they want you to go and evaluate. I mean, it's why it's in the evaluation, right? Like, we're in the evaluation phase. At some point, and I think this is they've pushed this back, right? It was going to be July or later. They'll actually start enforcing this upon us. So just to be aware of, every time we hit a new phase, people are going to talk about this and kind of freak out and pretend like it's a new thing. It's not a new thing. It's been with us for over a year. Microsoft is just taking this next stage. And my guess is that almost, a very small number of people are going to work through that process I just outlined, because it is, that is batshit crazy. I mean, completely. I know, right?
I haven't seen that many restarts since the first Vista SP1 when we started it. That had 7. It was all new installation technology for Vista, and it was brutal, and it was 7 restarts. Everyone was like, that seems like a lot.
Wow. How many years? We've got it down by 1. Yeah, it's the two reboots, and I don't think they say it, but they've said this in the earlier versions of it. They were like, reboot and then wait. You got to wait at least 5 minutes for some background process to go, and then you could reboot it. And it's just like, okay, yeah, people are definitely
start sleep.
Yes, people are definitely going to do that. Absolutely, sure. Anyway, sorry. It is a thing. If you're getting flack from it from your security team, go have that fun discussion. Moving along, one thing that Microsoft did do this month, which was really interesting, is they actually documented what other Microsoft products means. So if you are patching with Windows Update for Business or Intune, there's always, implicitly you have operating system updates, so quality or feature updates. But there's also always been this little checkbox you to be like, and other Microsoft products. And the question is always like, okay, well, what are those? And they've always been coy, very, very coy about what those is. And so I know the person that I interact with a lot, Carly, heard that. And so she finally went to the team and they started actually documenting what all of these. Zoom, why is there Zoom? But okay, I digress. I guess it's in there somewhere. But there is now a list. If you ever wondered what exactly is other Microsoft products, my guess is this is initially when they released this, I immediately noticed a bunch of people said, well, you're missing this and this and the other thing. And so consider this the sort of V1 of this. I think there's actually already been a couple of updates to it. But if you see anything missing, go ahead and add it. But now we finally we can answer this question when often management asks, like, okay, what does that actually mean? And we can give them this list. And that's a beautiful thing to have. Sort of off the wall, this is really kind of a clickbaity non-issue, but like, hey, if you have an LG TV and it's literally hooked directly to the internet, as in like you don't have it behind a firewall for some stupid reason, that's bad. Don't do that. Apparently there's,
You mean, in general, you just shouldn't, put IoTs to like direct access to the internet with no firewall or blocking them. Like, just don't do that in general.
Right.
Or if you really want to have a good time, go look at all the calls that those things make. If you don't like put them inside of a VLAN.
Right. And so like here, it's like they have like, well, you can see it in the picture, right? Like there's a mobile app you can use to control your smart TV. Apparently that protocol wasn't overly secure. And so, there's only like 88,000 of these things out there though. So, it's probably a non-issue. I found it funny more than anything particularly concerning. Moving along, this is what we pre-gamed this a little bit. the Cybersecurity Review Board finally released a report on the Microsoft Online Exchange incident from summer 2023. That's what we were talking about. How, sorry, if you missed the very intro of this, you kind of came in halfway through this conversation, where in 2023, some threat actors, I think we believe it's China, but you may never know, was able to get some sort of sign. I think it was like a signing cert, right? Am I getting the right one?
Yeah. So it was the certificate key basically in order to access Exchange mailboxes that they were basically able to do.
Right. And if you have access to Exchange Online, somewhat globally, where are you going to go? You're going to go to the U.S. Department of Security. And so you might imagine the United States government took a slightly dim view of that, did their own report trying to figure out what went on. And my understanding is technically right now, we're still not 100% sure how they did that. Earlier reports, I think they were a little more like, oh, we know how, and it was this convoluted thing of how they got the cert. I think they've walked back on that and like, we're not 100% sure.
So the initial report findings basically were that there was a crash dump that happened. And when this crash dump happened from the secure network, basically anytime a crash dump happens, it dumps out so that it can be analyzed to figure out like why. And that the dump file from that moves into a non-secure network as a result of it. And supposedly the original thought was that a copy of the key was included in that, which as a side note, if you have things turned on, like, I don't know, PowerShell logging or things like that in your environment, this is also how an attacker can compromise things if you put stuff like plain text passwords inside of PowerShell scripts and stuff like that. And why people have been saying don't do that. It's the same pattern, different, but same. Where basically they got dumped down into a less secure environment that was already was a user in that environment was compromised, and they think that they were doing that. They then walked that back. Because they can't prove, they haven't actually been able to find a copy of it in what they thought it went out through.
Right. Now, the thing I want to highlight, which is to me interesting, is like if you read this report, like they really kind of go after like Microsoft as an org, right? Like, they're making, I mean, these aren't, I don't know that the U.S. government gets to make binding commands of Microsoft, but if you remember antitrust, some fun antitrust stuff, like sometimes you can get a little tense. But like these are really specific, things like, hey, there's a problem with Microsoft's security culture. We should, hold senior officers accountable, and literally they should stop pushing features out and focus on, substantial security improvements. That's pretty strong verbiage in my mind.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know that there's teeth to it, but wow. That this sort of paragraph, which is in the executive summary. So by all means, go download this thing, read the first few pages. It's interesting reading in general. If you want to continue to be on that and read all 32 pages like Jordan did, I'm not going to shame you for what you do with your time. But yeah, I just found this specific set of like, wow, they really kind of went over it, which is kind of funny because also what also happened this month, apparently there was like a file server somewhere that had open files that had internal passwords for service accounts within Microsoft. So that's fun. Not a great look for Microsoft. Again, just a tale of warning for all of us. Like, man, it kind of frightens me when I see these things. Like, you kind of think Microsoft does a pretty good game of EDR and all of these things, and yet still, here's this server serving up files that have passwords in them. Moving sort of out of security, just a note that this got some hot topic that Microsoft had announced that they are no longer giving free 365 developer subscriptions out. Kind of create a bit of a furor, if you will. People are not exactly pleased by this, and it's going to make it somewhat harder for people to get an environment to start doing Microsoft 365 things. So let's move into Intune here a little bit. There's some interesting stuff in the Intune space that came out this month. Copilot, shocking. So Copilot for Intune is in public preview. What can you do with it? Primarily, you can use it to manage settings and policies. So in theory, you can ask questions about your existing policies and say, hey, what should I do? Or you can come in and say, hey, I want to do this, and it will, in theory, tell you the policies you need to set to make that happen. The other thing you can do, the other main focus is you can go in and ask it about specific devices and even compare one device to another. So the idea is like, hey, this device is having this problem. Why? Why do you think it's having this problem? Or what has changed on this device? Or you can compare it between, hey, I know this is similar to device B. Let's compare these two. Tell me what's different. So that's intriguing. I haven't actually played with it a whole lot, but that's a interesting use of AI, and we'll see how well or poorly it does it. So they also started adding some BIOS configuration, so you can use the docs here call out like Dell's command line, or Dell's BIOS config tool. Like you can take the output of those config tools and create actual policies that you can now deploy within Intune to actually manage BIOS or UEFI settings. Endpoint Privilege Manager, that got updated for support approvals. So Endpoint Privilege Manager is the just-in-time elevation idea, and they added the support for, hey, I'm going to ask support to approve of this thing, and in a real-time fashion, support will say yes or no on their end that you can go ahead and elevate that particular process. They also started allowing you to expedite non-security updates. So within Intune, you've been able to expedite the monthly security patches as well as out-of-box patches. So that was for domain controller, so there's no server patches. But if there's an out-of-box patch that's critical, they were adding those in, and you can expedite those. Now it's basically just everything. So they're talking about the non-security updates, which primarily we're talking about preview updates. So your week C and D updates, so your third and fourth weeks of the month, if they release a quality update that fixes a critical issue you're having, like, okay, now you can go ahead and expedite those things if you need so. And then lastly, in terms of this news, they updated the security baseline for Windows 23 H2. I saw a bunch of people talking about that stuff, but there's a new baseline available if you want to go take a look at it and implement it. And then the last three things I have are really kind of a segue into what we're going to discuss with Rob, I believe, unless he surprises us, which would be totally fine, Rob. By all means, go a completely different way. But there's been some trends in open source, and one that I'm pointing out is so Redis, and you may not know what Redis is, but Redis is sort of a backplane for scaling out cloud services. I mean, that's the most hand-wavy thing in the world, but like that's what you need to know about Redis. So it's actually very, very popular, and they have changed their licensing model. They're no longer strictly open source software as defined by the OSI. Does anybody know what that open source initiative? Is that it? Okay, I got it right. I thought I did. It's no longer technically open source. It's source available. And they are doing this. They're following a model that's similar to what Hashicorp, which is Teradata, which is, well, we'll talk about that next, which is basically just says, we're kind of tired that we're building this open source software, and then Microsoft and Amazon, they're going to take, and they're literally just delivering the thing we build as a service. So, if you wanted to go buy to Microsoft or Amazon, you could literally buy Redis or Teradata as a service that they host in their environment. And they were doing that by just using the open source software and basically not giving a lot back. And so Redis and HashiCorp said, well, we're going to change our licensing model so that you can still use this as open source, like you would open source for your own internal, even your own public products. But if all you're doing is being a competitor to us. Now I'm using air quotes because the question is, well, what does competitor mean? And the answer to that is, well, just ask us. Literally, the FAQ for like, what's a competitor is, well, talk to licensing at redis.com, whatever it is, and we'll flush that out. But if you are not Amazon or Microsoft, if you're not running a large cloud solution that's trying to offer Redis as a service, you're probably going to be fine. But it's part of a trend because the next news item we have is related to Teradata. So what happened? What has already happened? I think with Redis and happened with Teradata or HashiCorp that did the same thing. Well, what happened is somebody did what you could do with open source. They went and forked it. So there's this. So OpenTofu is one of. I don't know if it's the only, but so So Teradata did, months ago, made that same kind of decision of changing their license from an official open source software to a source available, and that people were pissy about it, which is exactly the kind of thing we're going to talk about in a hot minute. But like people are pissy about it, and it's open source. So what you can do, you can literally just go and say fork, and so that's what they did. And then recently, Terraform or Hashicorp actually sent a letter of saying they're going to possibly bring legal action against OpenTofu for copying some of their source. So that's an interesting development. The last thing I'm going to say until we really truly transition is this, because this to me was the big news security-wise of this month. Even though it's a bit of a nothing burger, but it should be a huge wake-up call. I say nothing burger because like this probably actually didn't get deployed. So none of your environments that you're listening to us are almost likely not susceptible. They were not a problem unless you were literally on the cutting edge of some Linux distros, right?
Yeah.
But had this thing. Okay, so what is this thing? So what it basically, I'm not going to go through the details of what happened here, except for saying the end result would be that the people that anybody who had a specific private key, which would obviously be the people that put the malware in there in the first place, they would literally be able to connect to almost any Linux device on the face of the planet, almost, as those updates flowed up into the Linux stack, into the Linux distributions. And if I remember right, like it was in early builds of, was it Red Hat and Debian, I think?
Yeah, it was Red Hat. Red Hat specifically, I know for sure. I don't know about Debian.
Debian had it, really.
Yeah. So like those are some of the largest distros that we know. Like this managed to get into that tool set, and only by a complete fluke. Some guy at Microsoft, he's a Microsoft employee. He wasn't really doing it as part of Microsoft, but he just noticed that things were slower, and he dug into it, and he found out, okay, what had happened? Like this hacker group had spent years to gain leadership of this small little project that dealt with some compression utilities. So like think zip files, right? Like we compress files and you uncompress files. And they created this little thing. And these guys were able to not submit. It wasn't in the main code base. It wasn't even in like, you couldn't just like look at the code they wrote and said, oh, they changed it. It wasn't how they actually built the product and how it got distributed was where the hack was. But it was literally going to go out to the large swath of Linux servers and devices around the world, allowing these guys to just securely remote into those. I mean, I say it like literally they could use SSH to remote into these devices from literally anywhere in the world. And so it didn't happen. For the most part, it didn't happen. We found it. It got stripped out. All of the distros have sort of fixed the problem. But this is the famous meme here, right? This is how all modern infrastructure works. You got this little guy right down here, upon which all of this sort of teeters. And so with that, I hand it over to Rob. Stop sharing, because Rob is uniquely, I think, at an interesting intersection of this, which is you've been a long time maintainer and founder of an open source project, even coming out of Microsoft, right? Like that. Yep. That's where we started. So you're familiar with, very painfully familiar with the needs and wants of a large organization, yes. And you're also painfully familiar with what it's like to love something so much that you're going to come out of a large org like Microsoft, and you are going to sort of take the plunge and like, hey, this open source thing, I love it. We're going to make it open source, but also I need to find a way to eat, right? And so like, how does that work?
Yeah, you're right. It's a very strange dichotomy that we kind of try to hold in our space at the same time. And Brian, I think you found me because I ended up seeing a email thread between the original maintainer and what we now know as the attacker. And this thread was just in 4 short messages. I felt the pain of this maintainer so deeply because I have lived that. I continue to live it. It happens regularly to maintainers in open source, where people come in and start beating you up about your project. And in his case, from what I could tell, he was alone. So he was doing the project by himself. And these people were telling him, well, why haven't you just done this? And why haven't you done this? And, you should just give up on your project because you're not able to keep up with it. I mean, so I laid out the whole story, and he mentions along the way that someone's helping him off list. It's a little bit sus to start with, but off list, which we find later ends up being the attacker that gains access to this project and then rolls on from here. And a lot of people talked about what Brian talked about, which is the attack and how it all went and the amazing catch that it was and how they caught it and everything that it did. For me, it was a real world example of what happens because we today continue to ignore maintainers. We're just generally expected to the world has open source world has reached a space where we just kind of expect maintainers to do the work in these open source projects, and we don't think about what's going on behind the scenes with them. So this story that I told that was I felt like I could have written it about myself if I found the right email thread back any number of the 15 years, 18 years that I've been doing it. Because, the first couple of years are a little bit of a honeymoon when you get out there, because what happens is your project starts and you get all these people that are interested in your project because they're geeks like you and whatever specialization you're doing, and they know that it's early, which means it probably doesn't work. So they're very helpful. They want to be a part of this new thing that's happening. So those first few years are good.
There's a lot of promise there, and they're excited about the promise, even if it's not something that they're today relying on, even if it hasn't been this pillar.
Yeah. Or it's just like, oh, this is cool. We can do this now. I mean, the Wix toolset did that for creating Windows installers, right?
And to be clear, I was actually for years, I spent a couple of years doing Wix installers and used that community, and I saw so even before let's say the last year or so, I saw the things you refer to of you can write this yourself. I saw it in the Wix community of people making demands, and it's guys. Guys, no.
What happens is as a project grows and as it becomes, and this is something I'm trying to, a lot of you are going to get these early feelings from me that I'm slowly working on trying to refine this tell. But projects grow and there's a strata of open source projects out there. When a lot of people think of open source projects, a lot of times they think about the big, huge projects like .NET Core, maybe your favorite JavaScript framework, React, Vue, Svelte, whatever, Kubernetes, any of those large company ones that are in the CNCFs or Linux Foundations, all those big projects, those are in their own class. And most of them are funded usually out of some marketing budget for the company that backs them. I mean, the .NET exists because Azure exists, is my premise. If Azure was to go away, it's not clear how important .NET would be to the bottom line for Microsoft, because it's right now not an AI language, for example, if you see those shifts. So those high-level projects have different exposures and support because you have a company behind them paying the money, paying people. Then you have I'm going to switch to the other extreme. You have the hobby projects, the projects that are getting started. And I call them hobby not because to diminish them, but just that's kind of where they're at, their early stages. And that's where they may get picked up and a whole bunch of people love them. And if enough people love them, then those projects grow up into this middle class that exists. And it's a pretty wide space. And the Wix toolset pretty rapidly grew into that middle class for a number of reasons. One, it was the first open source project for Microsoft. So it got a lot of attention out of the gate, straight up advertising. I don't pretend that. But then it was really useful. And then it was really, really useful to a whole bunch of companies. And actually, that's why I left Microsoft, because the project was so useful to companies. And some of them were telling me, we'd love to use this, but we can't because it's just open source. So what happens if we have a bug? What do we do? So I created FireGiant to say, we'll create a company that will provide all the support, everything you need to take advantage of this open source project. So Wix had gone into that middle tier where large companies, small companies, individuals, everybody from every strata of the software space were using it in the particular domain that it worked in, right? So it was known across this whole space, and everybody, not everybody, a lot of people were using it. And when you get into that middle class, you get outnumbered. The number of people that are just there to work in the community get outnumbered by the people that are just there to use it. Right. And that's when you switch into a consumer model where all your project is being consumed. And in the last few years, I've had to add another adjective of they're entitled consumers. And it's just a general approach that the consumers show up and expect bugs to be fixed, expect their answers to be, or their questions to be answered, and expect all the documentation to be in place so they don't have to answer questions. They expect a product out of the open source project. And maintainers who've been maintaining their project since the beginning, who care about it deeply, are holding on to usually with their bare knuckles as all this stuff is flowing at them. And if you're lucky, there's more than one person maintaining the project. But most projects out there, most open source projects are run by one person by themselves. And I know we talk about, oh, well, there's all these pull requests and everybody can submit code and everybody can read code. Most people do not read the code. They just ask a question, how do I make this happen? And the other thing is, if people open pull requests, most of the time those pull requests are targeted for that one person's problem that they hit. So they've done whatever they needed to knock out that one little space, which means the maintainer has to take it in and absorb it, which may mean, oh, they just copied entire file, made the one change, and the maintainer has to then bring them back or maintain 2 copies of one file. I bring that example up because that's exactly one of the pull requests we have open in Wix right now, where someone needs to solve their problem. They essentially copied everything, and we're looking at going, we can't really maintain 200 lines of code duplicated like this. That's not going to be maintainable. So the maintainer ends up being the person that has to take on everything. Even the pull requests, which are appreciated, which are pointing in the right direction, end up being more work. Sometimes pull requests are more work than bug requests because you have to somehow explain to the person that submitted the code, thanks, but it's not going to really fit for what we're doing. And if they didn't open an issue and talk about it first, they may have gone down a really long path. Right. So you may be like, oh, that's a good idea, but we have to completely rewrite it. Like all kinds of things happen.
You solve this one problem to the exclusion of everything else you just created. All the problems you just created.
And it's not their fault.
No.
Because they don't know. They're not in the project all the time because we don't have enough people participating and living inside the project. It's just the maintainers. For whatever reason, these projects end up being maintained, most of them, by 1 or maybe 2 people. I'm very lucky in that I've had a co-maintainer for the whole time that Wix has been open source. And I had a small group of people that I had built up inside Microsoft that helped when it was in Microsoft. When I left, now I have a small company of people that work with me that help keep it sane, like just someone else to bounce off. And with a co-maintainer who's also out there, we balance ourselves where one person will get mad when people are insulting you and the other person will go, how should we respond to this? And it takes a huge amount of burden off the one person running the project. So when I saw that thread for that maintainer in XC, I could just be like, he's on his own and he's just like, he's just getting beat up. I could see how they did it. And there are some people that have posited that all the people on that thread are actually attackers trying to manipulate the project to let the attacker in. And when you read it, it certainly could read that way. However, it's very easy to also read as, no, there's just a couple people that aren't very nice, and the attacker's just benefiting from their timing. You're
here to tell us it might have been that, but trust me, it happens naturally. It doesn't have to be.
Exactly.
It didn't have to be.
And so
it makes me think of the old paranoia quote, right? Like it's not paranoia if they really are out to get you, and this might actually be a case of that at times, right?
Yeah. So there's the sob story, and everybody's like, yeah, we've heard all this. This is the way it is. It just is. That's what you have to deal with in open source. And what I'm trying to now do is take this single solitary point where in the past it has been maintainers burning out and having poor work balances because they want so hard to keep their thing working, but they're dying supporting it. And now it's turned into we almost own the entire world of Linux machines. all of them. And it was like some sort of penicillin discovery that we tripped across the thing because it wasn't found in code review. Because
everyone watching this, I highly recommend you go read how it happened, because seriously, it is just so bonkers how lucky we got.
It is amazing.
And you have to ask, how many times have we not got lucky and we don't even know about it?
I don't know. So where I'm at now is this maintainers and supporting maintainers is now, in my opinion, borrowing the thing, is an attack vector, right? People will attempt to take projects that are important and maybe try to manipulate them in the spaces. So we should do, which I would argue we should have done morally, we should just do, is we should support our maintainers more. Now, when I say support, I mean support. That does not mean you have to pay them all. That may work for some, but it means different things for different projects for different people. And so where I see a lot of times that this whole conversation, if you agree that this is a problem, I'm hoping we're finally kind of getting past the point where this is a problem and we can start focusing on what do we want to work on, is let's support the maintainers. So where I said we should start and is that businesses, for selfish reasons, should now get to know and understand who all the maintainers are that are contributing into their company. They need to know who all of these maintainers are that are contributing code that end up being shipped with their product. And for some people, that might be really daunting. They're like, there are so many open source projects we consume. How many people out there are essentially shadow employees or shadow vendors dropping code into our product that we're not even evaluating and thinking about? How do we know and how do we support, how do we deal with them? You have vendor relationships with everybody else. What's your relationship with all the maintainers?
And that's a little bit of what Jordan was saying right at the beginning, right? Even as, we're seeing customers ask us, give us a list of all, what all the open source that's backing your stuff. And it's I mean, and we for anyone who missed the preemptive conversation, was that's a technically solvable problem, right?
Hard.
To get a list
be really
of
hard.
everything. Yeah, but it's not rocket science. It's just hard. But
and it's not just hard either. Too, the other half of it is it's expensive, right?
Maybe I don't know how expensive it is. I honestly, nobody's tried. I haven't seen a deep attempt to do this. Most people are like, the open source is free, therefore I don't have to pay for it. I see this at FireGiant. We just had a customer come up and go, why should we pay you? It's free.
Yeah. Right.
You're right. It's free. Go ahead and use it. It's painful beyond belief because that is the prevailing attitude everywhere. Right. So when you approach maintainers, I want to make this is the next step. I'm hoping companies, I hope all of you out there are now thinking, all right, how much open source do I use? How much do I have to worry about this? Could XZ happen to us? What does this mean for us? And then you're like, all right, if we were to reach out to maintainers, how would we do that? And the next thing is, when you reach out, there's a very good chance that all your maintainers are going to have very different expectations for what they want out of the project that they're working on. And your relationship with the maintainers will be different depending on what the relationship is. There are a lot of maintainers out there that are just doing it for fun. They don't want to get paid. They don't want the problems that come with being paid. They don't want the responsibilities that come with being paid. And so then you, as a company that are using this code, now have a volunteer hanging out, delivering code that you depend on in some way. You have to make this business decision. How much do we depend on the volunteer? And what do we do around that? Do we support them? We're like, great, you know what? You don't want money, we get that. How about we have you come speak and fly you out to our company and you speak to our company about the thing you do. Give them a little bit of a boost in the kind of things. I don't know. I'm bringing up things just so people start thinking creatively for those maintainers that don't want to get paid. There are also some projects that grow to a certain size and complexity, not like XZ. XZ is like that example I was saying before. It's too small a thing that probably ever have a company around it. But you get something like Wix that's 500,000 lines of code and has an entire platform system. We built a company around that. Maybe you switch and you go, okay, so how do we pay and get it covered? And I know that sounds extremely self-serving, It is a little bit self-serving from a FireGiant point of view, but you need to go think about what it means. If you're not going to pay, what are you doing to help make sure that the maintainers are supported and not getting run over?
And the other thing that's also interesting, I think, about that too, is the regulatory requirements that I wonder are going to start coming up. So we've had these things from different like security frameworks for years now, for things like FedRAMP, things like ISO, and things like that. Like, I wonder what the long-term impact of this this hack, basically, at the end of the day, right, is going to be on things like that, right? Because when you start to consider people like an employee or like a component, like, you're absolutely right, they are basically a shadow employee, right? Well, then it starts to have these questions. Or vendor, shadow. Right? Yeah, exactly. Yep. Right. So like now you have these questions of like, okay, well, now that they are that, well, how do I do a background check on them? Because in order to meet my regulatory requirements, because if they're a vendor or if they are a shadow employee, I have to do that. The maintainers probably aren't going to agree to that, like arbitrarily, like just like, no, there's no way that's going to happen.
There's no way. So right? We've had someone bring up what's the EU one? There's a new EU one going on.
GDPR or the
not GDPR. There's a new one. I forgot a supply chain one, an EU supply chain one out there that's going to bring like this whole long list of stuff. And people are like,
oh yeah.
I've had people contact Wix to say, so what are you guys going to do to comply with this? And I'm like, I'm not doing anything in Wix.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll do something in FireGiant for all of our customers that have to deliver to the EU, because we will work with our customers to solve the problems. But you've in Wix, I don't know. You'll figure it out. I'm not doing more work though, because I'm already done. Like I do so much already. No.
Yeah, this is, I know, Rob, we were talking about like what's, always trying to find what the root is and write the right questions. Like that requirement is a requirement of your consumer. It's not a requirement of the Wix. Like that is,
not the maintainer.
You might say that sounds like a you problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's
not to be glib, but like it's true.
Yeah. It's so where I'm trying to bring up this. I'm trying to get a shift so that companies start thinking instead about open source is free. Full stop.
Yeah.
Right. They start thinking open source is maintained by somebody. That's a vendor or employee, depending on how you want to look at it. They're on my team. Somehow they're contributing to my product. How do I make sure that I take care of that? And then, because it's open source, you have to put a wild card on this, which some businesses, I know I've dealt with a bunch of them, some of them will not like. The maintainer doesn't report to you. Right. And they may not want to report to you. And they may not really want anything to do with you, which now means you have to find a way to work with them, bringing in their dependency that works for both of you. It's a relationship that you have to create between you and the maintainer. And I don't say that because all maintainers are going to do that. I just want people going with the right attitude. They show up and say, I am very large company from Fortune 10. Please do X, Y, and Z, or I need to talk to you. We need to have a chat. Maintainer be like, no, you need to go in differently. And I don't have the words yet, but it may be, hey, what kind of conversation can we have? Because this has come to our light because of all these things that have happened. Right. What conversation should we have with you about making sure that you're doing good and you're continuing to do good, and we can continue to trust you because we have trusted you for all this time? Just what is this relationship that we have with you? And some maintainers will be like, great, here's support contracts and things like that. Or some would be like, no, hang out in my chat and tackle the guys that are mean. Tell people stop being mean to the maintainer because he does really good work. Or whenever you release, tell people, hey, good job. We just released our product. We want to let you know that your stuff is awesome and we really appreciate it. We just shipped our product to 500,000 people and you were part of that. You have to find out what that message may come off really good or really bad depending on the maintainer. It's going to be work. Yeah, I see someone brought up the thread with Microsoft and FMPEG. It's a similar sort of thing. There's all these stories out there. Now, Microsoft works
when you said Fortune 10, that's where my head went. I was like, oh, yeah. It's not a hypothetical.
No, it's not hypothetical. It's not hypothetical. I had NASA show up and say, hey, you need to tell us these things about your project. Here's the thing. No. When you show up, these maintainers, most of them will never even know you existed because most companies hide. They don't want to be known for whatever reason. I don't really know the root fear, but you're going to show up and this will be the first time the maintainer finds out, and they may be really frustrated. Like, you've been doing all this. Where have you been all this time? Why haven't you been helping me? And help simply could be, why aren't you just out here saying thank you and good job every once in a while? Like, not all the time, it doesn't be bad, but literally nobody, I told people I could count the number of times people had said thank you about on both hands. Right. And recently started getting to toes because some people kind of went, I was like, I never really said thanks for all that stuff I did.
Right.
Just that alone, sometimes you're like, oh, thank gosh, I'm not alone. And people do like this after dealing with all the bugs and all the problems. And I think the Redis and the Hashicorp things have a lot of VC spin to them, but they're also coming from the point where we can't survive. I don't know. Redis has a really sketchy story if you dig into it. But I don't know where they're coming from. But for some of them, for some companies, I can see it. They're like, yeah, I just can't feed my people. So we're going to do these more extreme things that make life rough for all our customers. They're going to abandon all the things that could be that we used to do in open source, mostly because at the root, we're not supporting the maintainers. And that's the thing that I want to go after, whatever that means.
So we're coming up on time, which is fine. We can still take. I always want to give people the ability to watching to play off. So we can say, do you have any closing thoughts? And then we'll do Q&A if anybody wants to stick around and ask questions.
Start asking questions in your company. If you use open source, start your team. You don't have to go all the way to your CEO. Start at your team, figure out what open source you're using, and then think, when was the last time I was supportive of this thing that I use? That's it. Just and then figure out how are you going to go support those people. Start at your team. And we'll go from there. If every company starts doing that across all the companies, they'll all start going, oh, we really do need to think about this shadow employee thing. They're not employees. How do we treat them? How do we deal with this? We don't have answers. We just have to start asking the questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Rob, for joining us.
Yeah.
This was exciting to have you on. Thanks for answering a random DM on LinkedIn.
And go you said before, your local maintainer on the back, everyone.
Yeah, I want to think about it. Thank you. As a consumer and consumer of Wix, in your terminology, because I've never committed code and I've thought about it, but I don't write C++ well. So that was
we write a lot of it C# if you write in those parts.
Isn't it? Okay. Yeah. But anyway, I want to thank you for the work you've done because it helped me in my career, and it has helped people build better installers, even though they can still build crap.
And there's still so much more we can do. There's still so much more we can do.
Spoiler, next time you're going to tell me humans are the problem.
You're not wrong. And probably next time I'm going to tell you, oh, look, yet another patch for Exchange.